Well, hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and we are on episode 4 of Land of the Lustrous. We are going to be a third of the way through the anime after this episode. I feel like we just started. I feel like we just started. What the heck is going on? The last two episodes were kind of together in one little group. It was mainly of Phos getting turned, or rather becoming incorporated into a snail shell, which is just seems like the most random plot point, but it felt so normal with this series. Adamant's been meditating or asleep this entire time, so good for him. And Diamond, who has been pulling their weight, has been doing the hard lifting of getting Phos back, helping to get Phos put back together, and also doing some self-discovery along the way, which is really nice because I like Diamond's character a lot. I'm rooting for them. I want them to keep growing as a character, and I hope we see more of them. And also, Cinnabar is still being angsty, but that's nothing new. And we've got to meet a couple of the other gemstones. We don't really know their names yet, but we got to meet some of them. I was thinking about that today when I was looking back at episode 3, because I still have lots of questions about this series. Mainly questions about, how did this civilization get started again? How they're apparently over 100 years old, so why are they just now doing an encyclopedia? What's the deal with that? And I was thinking about it. They said in episode 1 that a specific organism got embedded into the minerals, and over time, they've evolved into these gemstones. That's what they've evolved into. And I wondered if possibly this was like this entire world. We kind of talked about it just. I have two camps that I'm thinking towards. One is that this is like a post-apocalyptic world, and the world as we know it has completely, had an apocalypse, completely is gone to hell, and the DNA or the microscopic souls of humanity has now evolved and fused with these minerals, and they're forming their own race again instead of the Homo sapiens. And that's why there is this collective knowledge, perhaps, of the saws and the clothes and this technology and the structure and the architecture. It's all a collective that has built back up from humanity before, and they just don't realize it. They're just like, this is how it's always been, and they just don't question it, right? Or this is like an alternate universe where instead of humanity existing, instead of Homo sapiens being created, the minerals are what came instead. And it's these non-binary minerals that have become their own consciousness and become their own people and their own species. And I have questions, and those are my two theories so far. Now, as to what the moon people are, the solar lunarians, and what they want with all of this, that's a big old question mark too. But we are near a third of the way through this series, so I'm hoping that they give us some answers maybe in this episode, or they won't. As to what's going on, because the whole moon thing and why they want the minerals, we still don't know. Is this like a Toy Story scenario? Is the perspective totally off? We don't know. The snail was huge, but then they saw little crabs earlier that were not huge last episode, so lots of questions. Lots of questions indeed. One thing I do want to talk about is that on the Discord through Patreon, someone shared this back, because episode 1 has now, as I'm recording this, come out on Patreon. And so they sent this saying, translation notes of Congo Sensei. The reader will have noticed that the characters in this series are named after gemstones. The word Congo literally means gold, hardness, and has significance in Japanese Buddhism. Is this adamant why he looks like a Buddha? It is related to the Sanskrit word Vajra, which means both diamond and thunderbolt, and represents indestructibility. Congo is part of the word for diamond, but is also used to refer to extremely hard substances, not limited to diamonds, similar to the English word adamant. Oh, okay. So, theoretically, adamant is our strongest of the gemstones, the strongest of the minerals, but he himself, or they themselves, are not a diamond necessarily, but they're adjacent to it. That makes sense. We'll go with that. All right. That seems fair. I'm all here for it. So thank you for that translation note. And then, yeah, I'm going to try to keep using they, them, make these non-binary gemstones. I may accidentally, because it's just nature to me, second nature to use a pronoun. So an alternate pronoun. So I'll do my best. But I want to give a quick shout out over to our philanthropy tier on Patreon before we start this, because we have a new member. So I want to thank everybody on YouTube and Patreon for supporting the channel and supporting the reactions. I really appreciate it. But a special shout out to our philanthropy tier, which include Alex Cornejo, Anime Annie, Be Happy, Bryant Reed, Damage3245, Dana, Danny Donmai, Devorin, Danger Zone, Destiny Marie, Ichu, Eric, Phisho, Ghostly Turnip, Liam Poles, Elfreya, Lyndon, as well as Matthew Palfinier, Murphew, Nicholas, Sunspots, Shimoyama, Trails, Translucent Men, Alexander Q, Maroney W, and I alone am the bitchless one. That's gonna be so much fun to say. Anyway, I'm super excited, so thank you all so much for your support. All of my love. Yeah. So I'm really excited to dive into this. I have questions still, as you all know. I want to see what they're going to tell us. Don't worry, I will have looked at comments for Patreon and YouTube, I'm sure by next time I record. So I'll be able to talk about some of those, I'm sure, in the comment section. So, but we're going to get started with Land of the Lustrous episode 4. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. And let's do this. Hey, remember when this was a simple show? Remember when this was just a story about rocks and geology, and we weren't going to get into existential questions of the mind, body, and spirit? Well, those days are long behind us, so... I love how the third episode I had practically nothing to say. In this episode, I was like watching the reaction going, I have lots of things to say. Oh. Okay. So, a couple things. We're going to talk about a lot of psychological things going on in this episode, but I want to go ahead and just point out that I am so excited by the twists and turns that this show is already taking, and it's getting complicated very quickly, and I'm like, oh, okay, so we're going to break this down, but it essentially was given to us in the first couple of episodes, the hints at what's been going on, and the reality is what our dear snail, jellyfish, octopus being has come to determine is the fact that humanity essentially, get this right, humanity basically screwed itself over, or rather it was hit by a meteor 6 times. I guess that's not our fault. Although it wasn't divine retribution, who knows? But the meteor caused humanity to basically, whiteboard coon's getting a little tipsy over here. Basically caused humanity to splinter into 3 subspecies. One were the gemstones, which are essentially the bones of humanity, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. One were the mammals that we'll see, which were the flesh of humanity, and we'll talk about them. And then the others are the Lunarians, which were the spirit of humanity, seemingly. And now we get that the Lunarians' idea is to gather them all together to be one with humanity again. But the snail makes a good point. You can't go back to how things were. Evolution doesn't work that way. Even if you would like to, that's not possible. So they're kind of like, the snail's like, I don't want to go back there because my people are being subjugated, and whatever their goals are is not possible. So they're like, no, let's not do that. So I'm going to back whiteboard coon up just a hot second. All right. Give myself some more space. So that's pretty much what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the idea that we get the Lunarians are essentially the spirit of humanity. We'll talk about them in a little bit. But they're wanting to gather everything back together to reforge society. Like you can't put the vase back together once it's broken. But if these Lunarians are anything, they are much like humans in that they are stubborn and don't listen to reason. So We'll just go with that. But we're gonna touch base on all of this here a little bit as we go through this. I think that this all makes sense now a lot more with what Adamant has. So it also makes sense that the Lunarians have like a spiritually cultural, like they look like, I don't know if they look like Shiva, which is an Indian goddess, or if they look like something related to Buddhism. I'm not culturally familiar enough to know, and I don't want to look up spoilers. I'm sure that people will reference in the comments and I'll bring it up in a future reaction. Don't you worry. But they're all bowing down towards Adamant. And if these Lunarians are in fact the spirit of humanity, then it would make sense that they're trying to cater to the body to be like, hey, let's get that body back, right? So let's try to cater to it and connect to it. And the idea that the Lunarians are tied to sleep and dreams because it's spiritual would make a lot of sense as well. So I'm like, okay. And it's interesting that Adamant doesn't want to call it sleeping. He just wants to call it meditating because I guess, why would the gemstones have any reason to sleep, right? Why would that be a thing? So yeah, all of them are just looking at Adamant as if they're trying to touch him and get him to him. And that's when he wipes them all away. Interesting. I still feel with that dream that there is something not yet said. There's something Adamant knows that we don't. There's something Adamant is privy to that we are not privy to because, well, for one thing, he told Phos not to go to the sea. I'm presuming because he knew that the sea creatures there were deceptive, but why not just say that? Why not just point it out? Why are you gatekeeping knowledge, sir? So I'm very curious to know why Adamant didn't tell them and what the reasoning is behind that. Maybe Adamant knows more than they're letting on and they're not letting us know. I feel like Adamant should be a little bit, because they say this isn't good, that they're dreaming. And I'm like, okay, well, why is this not good? What prior experience do you have? Tell me more. So this entire series should be called Phos's Shenanigans because Phos is such a kind and gentle soul, and they find themselves in the worst possible shenanigans. So Adamant says that they rested too long and asks how long was I asleep or meditating for? And Jade's like, oh, not just a couple days, for just a day. What could happen in a day? So then, of course, they flip out whenever the vessels appear in the wetlands above the school, and Adamant's like, what's going on? And Adamant's like, are we fine? And Bort's like, oh, I handled it. We're all good. Adamant is the king of head pats, by the way. Head pats for everyone. Head pats for everyone doing a good job. I'm curious why Adamant is so much bigger than all of them, if that makes a difference. Why are they dressed differently than all of them? Why aren't they all dressed in the same monk gear? I don't know. Maybe it's because of Red Barrel, who is the fashionista of this entire situation. So the snail has a consciousness and is very vocal and is a woman and is the ruler of all the admirabilities. So they are ventricusis. Ventry, as we'll call her. Ventry. So we have Ventry. Ventry is the ruler of the admirabilities. I wonder if admirabilities has any other meaning behind it. I'm going to try to look it up and see. Admirabilities. Is there any other reasoning? Or is it literally just a sea creature? I think it's just a sea creature. Okay. We're not going to get into spoilers. So no, the only things that immediately popped up were like Land of the Lustrous. I'm like, okay, no, it's just akin to the series itself. So the admirabilis are, I don't know if they are all of the mammals, all of the flesh, or if they're just a particular sect of them. We don't know. But yes, supposedly Ventry is the ruler of them. And I was getting like Mineta vibes from My Hero Academia before we found out that it was a woman, that they were like just being kind of like pervy for, they were being like horny on main for Adamant. And I was like, oh, okay. And being like, what a hunk and all this. I'm like, interesting. But yes. And Phos is just like, I don't care. And then it's like, bow before me. And Phos is just like, this show, the physical humor is amazing. I love the physical humor between Phos and Ventry. They were great, right? You boorish jellyfish. And so Phos is like, what is the deal? And they're like, I originally hail from the coasts. And then every one of my people was taken by the Lunarians for our magnificent shells. So that makes sense. So the Lunarians gathered them up for their shells, probably thinking, and says they kept us and we grew large with the sweet water and sand on the moon. And we were robbed of our reason. So they're basically cultivated there on the moon. It said robbed of their reason, so I'm like, were they brainwashed? Were they just made into like, is this we're back a dinosaur story? Like what are we doing with that? I don't know if robbed of our reason is a translation issue or if it's like they were made into just mindless animal slaves. To what purpose? Why were they grown huge? Why is there sweet water and sand on the moon? So questions not being answered. I don't know. Interesting. Or unless it's like making some kind of commentary about how they were basically just fattened up and kept fat and sassy and just are sheeple on the moons. I don't know. We'll find out. My people are being cultivated there today. So meaning that they're just being like bred like livestock? I don't understand. And Phos is like, well, why am I the only one that can hear you? I think what's interesting about this, and we might as well dive into this other stuff on Whiteboard Coon really for a hot second, because Phos does not seem empathetic towards Ventry. And I think that's because they don't contain the mind and spirit. So I looked at a bunch of things. Obviously, we have Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And there were lots of different things concerning the body, the soul, and the mind. And I think that can be translated to, in this case, we're going to use it to basically transfer over to the template of the bones, the flesh, and the spirit. All right, so hear me out on this. So obviously, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the very base level is physiological. So if you have shelter, if you have food, if you have just basic needs, done. You're good. Then the second one is safety and security. I would argue the gemstones, while they don't need to necessarily eat, they don't need to eat or sleep or do anything. The fact of the matter is that they do have this safety and security in their little castle there, their little academy that they have going on. And then love and belonging. Love is tricky because these gemstones don't really seem to have a lot of emotion, although Diamond and Bortz would beg to differ. But there's definitely a sense of belonging community between all of the gemstones. They all gather together. They stay together. There's a sense of belonging community. And I would argue love and romance. Diamond exhibits a lot of that last episode and the episode before with Bortz. Cinnabar and Phos exhibit that. Most of the gemstones are shown in pairs, which could exhibit that physiological need to have a partner or be with someone. Even if you're asexual, even if you aren't planning to reproduce, humans still want company. They still don't want to be lonely. They don't like to be isolated. We want at least a companion, even if it's platonic. So I feel like the gemstones, whether they realize it or not, are sort of adhering to that need to be with someone, whether there is... The gemstones don't seem to reproduce, nor have the need to. So that's not on the table, but it very much is a sense of love and camaraderie and friendship. And honestly, I mean, you could apply a lot of queer overtones to this series because they're not needing to, the gemstones don't need to make babies. That's what Ventry and her people are doing. So there is like a separation there, which is fascinating to me. And I'm sure people could argue a lot of thematic elements in this series, as we're going to explore, could be applied to that. So that's fun. And plus they're gemstones. It's like a rainbow, so that's interesting. But anyway, Land of the Lustrous, a queer studies explorative journey, right? I'm sure that maybe has been done. If not, it should be. But yeah, so these three at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs are being met by the gemstones. They're covering the bare basics. What is perhaps not being met, which we should talk about, is self-esteem and self-actualization. I feel like Cinnabar and Diamond so far are the two gemstones in particular who are exploring those two ventures. whereas Cinnabar has self-esteem issues, and Cinnabar feels like they don't belong, and they feel like because they are potentially hazardous that they don't have any meaning there or purpose. So they want to be taken by the Lunarians so that they can find purpose. And then you have self-actualization, which Diamond is kind of going through, also with self-esteem. Diamond's going through self-esteem, but they also are trying to figure out, you know, what's the meaning of their existence? Why are they here? And I feel like Adamant is more in tune. I feel like maybe these minerals are slowly developing and evolving without realizing, and Adamant's like the only one that's onto it. Maybe, possibly, but then there's lots of things connecting the body, the mind, and the spirit, right? Or the body and the soul and the spirit. There is mind, body, and spirit, mind, spirit, and mind, soul, and spirit, flesh, bone, and spirit. The spirit's essential in all of them, but I also find it interesting, if you want to go to the Christian Luke 24:39, which states, "See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." So I thought that was interesting. We have flesh, bones, and spirit mentioned in the Bible, mainly Jesus saying, like, if I was a spirit, I wouldn't have flesh and bone. Here we are. I was like, I did not expect a passage from Jesus to be tied to Land of the Lustrous, but all right, prove me wrong. But yeah, so all the things pointed out that for humanity, the center of awareness is the connection of spirit, body, and flesh, which, or in this case, you know, spirit, mind, and body. And I thought that was interesting because that ties back to Adamant at the beginning, having the dream, having that awareness. It's kind of like a Garden of Eden scenario where, you know, you once you gain certain knowledge, it complicates things. And that seems to be where we're at with the gemstones. But then you had this other kind of bullseye chart that I thought was interesting that talks about the outside is the body, or the bones in this case, in this episode. And that's the idea of it's just functionality. It's just a brain and cells. It's just the basic of the basics. Like, it's literally your bones, the framework. And that's kind of what the gemstones are. They're this framework. They can be put back together. They don't, you know, their memories are tied to their framework. It's not a consciousness necessarily. If they miss part of their framework, they don't have that memory. So that's different than a mind and spirit. But also, they don't necessarily feel things. Like Euclase tells Rutile in this episode that they don't feel the cold or the warmth. So they don't have that sensoriness that Ventries people do. So they're very much just these immortal shells that have a consciousness, that have a personality, but they don't necessarily feel emotions the same way other creatures do. And they're maybe not as in tune with those emotions, but it seems like they're evolving. It seems like they're learning. It seems like that's developing, but that's not who they are at their core, which is interesting. Then you have Ventry, which is connected more to the soul, or in this case, the flesh, which is ideas tied to memories and emotions, the deceptiveness, the fact that Phos was deceived. I don't think that their fellow gemstones would deceive them, but these creatures would, because they're like humans in that regard. The ideas of belief, and most importantly, for Ventry and her people, is the concept of this cycle of life, of reproduction, of life and death, and of will. Because with the gemstones, there's not a lot of free will. It's Adamant's like, no, this is what we do. This is how you do things. You don't do anything else because it's dangerous. End of story. We're not going to go into it because we don't want to know the consequences. So none of the gemstones have, there's not a lot of autonomy. They're all a collective. They're all just like a little bundle of gemstones working together, but they don't seem to have like individualism. Whereas Ventry kind of talks about her people, but she herself is different from them. So, and doesn't go by a collective set of rules. So, and then in the center is the spirit. And we don't know much about the Lunarians at all, so it's hard to kind of go into that. But if the Lunarians are just a spirit and they're trying to like gain a form, essentially through the gemstones and Ventry's people, well, then that's a thing in itself. So I'm very curious to see what we're going to get with that. But yeah, everyone thinks that poor Phos is, you know, out of their mind, being like, you should, and they all like run past in their very samey uniforms, being like, don't talk to that snail. Have your mental issues checked out. Let's play cards. And then I'm the only one who seems to understand you. I love it. Everyone else thinks I'm going crazy. I do like the idea that Ventry has a true form underwater when they're able to soak up the salt and become their true form. But then you have the idea that if the gemstones don't put on the proper sunscreen that they need, that they will essentially like come apart in the water. So again, showing how, messed up and incohesive the three parts are when they're not together. I'm so fascinated by this. Like what's going to happen if they get all mixed together? How's that going to work? And so then Ventry talks to Phos about there's so many cuties here, like the black-haired one and the redhead who's out at night. And that's when Phos is like, you met Cinnabar? Oh my God. Cinnabar, I owe them again because they saved my life a second time. And so then Ventry's like, well, what are you getting at? And Phos is like, they shared a secret that no one else knows, that they don't value their life. And Phos is like, I don't know why, but I want to imagine that Cinnabar wouldn't have just told anyone. Again, Cinnabar seems much more aware than the other gemstones and a little bit more psychologically advanced maybe. And Phos is like, I don't understand why Cinnabar would tell me this secret. Like, I don't think they would just tell anybody, which is very true. I think Adamant's the only one that knows as well, or seems to be, right? So I'm so curious where this is going to go with the two of them, especially since Phos is nearly captured again. I'm like, I want to go to the moon and see what's going on, but I don't want to know if I want to go yet. And Phos is like, no one's ever trusted me to do anything before. And that's why I'm going to be the hero this time around. Anytime a character in anime says they're going to be a hero this time, that's a bad sign. That's a warning flag of things to come. Mm-hmm. And of course, Rutile just seems to be very curious about what all this is about and about, the eccentricness this Phos is adding. One thing I really like too that has not been talked about or seen in this episode is that Phos's glow from their hair is reflected on their uniform. And I don't recall that before this episode. And I really like it. I think it's a nice little touch. Also, someone in the Discord, because I said last episode that Studio Orange also does Trigun Stampede, they pointed out that the color of Phos's hair is the same color of part of Vash's armor. And I was like, oh, that's fun. That's really cute. I like it. But yeah, we actually get to see Rutile's mineral in this episode, which was really cool. And so Rutile wants to break apart Phos and put them back together again to hopefully cure the fact that they can hear Ventry. But I also like that Rutile kicks Ventry Team Rocket style into oblivion. Great. Team Rocket is blasting off again. And then ends up landing right on Adamant's head. Amazing. Adamant also giving the head pats to Diamond, just going on his head pat tourapalooza. And Phos believing they're going to get in trouble because of Ventry landing on Adamant's head. What's interesting is that Adamant... Ventry's like, I can't eat you, which is interesting. I also love that all of them are just dying of laughter. Bortz and Diamond are in the corner just with their heads like pressed up against the beam. Jade has their head in their hands. Like, absolutely hilarious. I also love when Ventry has the hearts on their being because they want to go out with Adamant. I'm like, whenever they said at the very end that they wanted to exchange Phos for their brother, I was like, oh, okay, this is not like a, I'm going to trade you out for my lover. No, Ventry's like, I want to get with Adamant. Let's get this going. I don't know if Adamant would go to the sea to be with you, but it's glad that you're trying. Oh my God. You seem to hold us in high regard. I really thought that Ventry was just going to be there for comedic effect and was going to follow us the entire series. And then the moment they went underwater, I was like, oh, this seems like a trap. And this seems not good. Hate it when we're right, But maybe Ventry will sink down after next episode. But I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen next episode. Is Ventry going to go with Phos and be taken to the moon? Is anyone going to show up to try to save Phos and then Ventry's going to stick behind and be put in jail or something? I don't know. So Adamant tells Phos that since you're the only one that can hear Ventry, just to figure out what to do and have them help you do your encyclopedia. And that's when Phos asks about Cinnabar. And the way that Adamant reacts to Phos asking about Cinnabar feels like, one, Adamant going, do you care about Cinnabar? Why are we doing that? And two, oh, this is a topic I didn't want to talk about. And so Phos is like, why does Cinnabar have that job? And Adamant's like, and I like that Phos stands up for Cinnabar. And Phos is like, look, they could be hazardous, but they're also extraordinary. Isn't there anything else they can do? And Adamant's like, I haven't found a solution to the problem. I kind of like how Adamant kind of rose a little bit in my book this episode, because they do admit that there's a problem, but they don't have solutions for it. And they kind of admit their own shortfalls. That kind of takes a little bit of my suspicion away from Adamant, because it makes it seem like Adamant is trying to be helpful, but also is aware of their own limitations. So maybe this whole thing is a situation of Adamant just not having solutions and doesn't want to admit that. So they're just trying to like hold the fort down till they find something. And maybe it's less suspicious than I want to believe. We'll see. I also love the image of Cinnabar reaching for the flowers. And then as they're reaching, they stop and they hold back, and Adamant grabs their hands. Also, Adamant with the gloves on is interesting, because it's like, is that so that they won't get hurt by Cinnabar? And what's interesting is that Adamant says here, despite repeated attempts to persuade Cinnabar that merely living was enough in itself, they are far too kind and too wise to simply sit by idly. That to me is like, no, Cinnabar is higher up on the scale than some of the other gemstones, because it seems like Adamant is just trying to maintain the status quo of, oh, well, if we just hold down the fort here and just live out all of eternity, we'll be fine, because we're immortal and it's totally cool. And we don't have to question things. We don't have to, there's nothing we need to question or contemplate with much severity. We'll just keep living out our lives as we always have. Everything's fine. And Cinnabar's reached that self-actualization, self-esteem stage where they're trying to find things out for themselves and see what they can and see what happens. So yeah, I'm very curious. The whole encyclopedia thing now, I wonder if Adamant knew that Phos wasn't going to be able to finish it. So it was just, I'm going to give you this task, Phos. Now go on and keep yourself busy for the next 1,000 years. And Phos is like, what? So it was Cinnabar's idea to do the night watch. And I like that Adamant admits, they're like, I've confined Cinnabar to the night. So my own worry and ignorance is to blame. We are too complex to be satisfied with only being alive. So it seems like even though they're just the bones, they are evolving and recognizing, and there is some self-awareness that as being a subsect of humanity, there is complexity there, and there is the desire and the will to be more than just around, right? But fortunately, we are long-lasting. You may be frustrated with the need for patience and perseverance, but if you wish to be of use to Cinnabar when the time comes, just focus on completing the task that you've been given. And Phos is like, okay, but no. So then they're out and about, and Ventry is like, I really want to go to that sea. So let's go back to the sea, and now that I've slimmed down, there's something I remember, I want to go back home to the sea and get out of here. So that's interesting. They're like, we could find a clue to helping Cinnabar if we go to the sea. And at that point I was like, that sounds fun, but also why haven't they gone to the sea before? Why didn't Phos, I like Ventricrapsus, and they're like, that's not my name. And like, the sea is supposed to be off limits. But then Phos says, but I'm no use here anyway, so it's fine. I do like Rutile seeing the two-toned gem and then seeing it transferred over to our dear doctor, our pharmacist here. Interesting. I wonder if Ventry originally was put up by the spirits to go gather up minerals, and by doing so, they would have their brother released. And then it all kind of went to hell. So now they're like, well, this was my backup plan to lure you into the ocean. Or maybe the ocean was the meetup spot and the spirits know that. So anyway, we have this scene with Euclase getting the powder so that they can go into the water and not basically fall apart. So there's powder flowers and all of this. And luckily, things were cold enough they were able to cultivate it. It's interesting. I thought this scene was interesting because on the surface, it does look like the fact that they don't have genders and the fact that they're just basically like anatomy of a Ken doll. The nudity aspect is interesting because it feels more metaphorical. It feels more like with Euclase, it's stripping them down. And because Euclase talks about how the sun is pleasant, talks about, normally they see Lunarians every 3 days, which feels biblical in itself. Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, all that. And they're like, I wonder if things have changed. And with that, we see like the little Hercules beetles flying away. So I wonder if it's like a new evolutionary cycle or something like that. And so Euclase says that the heat of summers and cold of winters don't affect us like they do plants. And we'll never be attuned to danger as the insects are. Do you think it's because we're immortal? And Rutile says, well, we hardly fear a thing, even when our enemy changes our ways. So I find the idea of security interesting because Euclase is the one that's naked here. And it's sort of like them laying their soul to bear in this scene. Because they talk about their immortality. And they're like, we kind of are so used to not being affected by the seasons and having this like false sense of security. And since we know our enemies normally come every 3 days, we kind of can plan around it. So we have this like kind of false sense of security around us. But Euclase is like, I'm more fragile than the others, so I am scared because that is a sense of mortality. Like Bortz and Diamond seem fearless because they're not likely to be as hurt by the enemy, but Euclase, because they're like, no, there's stuff at stake, I could be hurt. It gives them that sense of, frailty, which is interesting. So yeah, but okay, and now this ties up where Rutile's like, I can't find my bomb that I had, and it's because it was taken by Phos to use in the ocean. I like that little continuity there. That's really good. So then Red Barrel shows up. Red Barrel's been making all sorts of fashion things, which is fun. And it's their new product. And they're like, I just got a day extension to work on it too. It's a more durable version of our uniforms. So Phos has the more durable version of the uniform too. Okay, so maybe it will help against the Lunarians. It has a new tag. Interesting. Okay. And yeah, Ventry is trying to encourage Phos to get to that ocean as soon as possible. And Phos is like, I have to do this so that this salve helps to keep me from looking hideous. Then Rutile's like, what we doing? And I like that Rutile's like, did you clear this with Adamant? Adamant's like, absolutely not. If you finish documenting the hill, but you haven't reported anything. Because I feel like Adamant knows that Phos hasn't done enough. And so they're like, yeah, no. And Phos is like, oh, this is going to take forever. And then the moment that Ventry started acting like, oh, the plants aren't enough to sustain me. Oh, I need to go back to the water. That's when I started to get suspicious. Like at first I thought that Ventry was just being trickstery and mischievous and being like, let's go to the ocean. But then it started to take a turn and go into Puella Magi Madoka Magica and started to go into Charlie the Unicorn territory where the other two unicorns, they're like, Charlie, let's go to Candy Mountain, Charlie. Except the ocean is Candy Mountain. And if you've not watched Charlie the Unicorn, it's on YouTube. It's like it's like a little flash animation from like 20 years ago. But at the end, the two evil unicorns, they lure Charlie to Candy Mountain. And I'll let you go find out what happens there. But every time Ventry was talking about, oh no, the plants aren't enough here to sustain me, Phos. Let's go to the ocean, Phos. I was like, I don't trust this. Is there going to be a magical Leopleurodon there? And sure enough, there's those damn Lunarians. So, and so then Phos, of course, is tricked. Because Phos is so innocent, they're like, oh, you need food and stuff. So I guess I'm not used to that. It almost feels very Garden of Eden too, like where the gemstones are. It feels very Garden of Eden, like Adam and Eve before they ate the fruit of knowledge and gained the knowledge of right and wrong. It kind of feels very much that way. Like, oh, you have to eat to survive. Oh, you have to do this. Oh, there's that. It feels very akin to that. But yeah, but Phos is like, okay, I guess it wouldn't hurt. And Phos is like, I don't get what death is. Is it being tired or stuck still? And Ventry says it's more like going far away. It's more like you're going away. And Phos says, well, but people are still there even if you can't see them, right? And Ventry's like, well, no, they're gone for good and you'll never find them again. And Phos is like, oh, what? Hold on. Well, will they hear you if you call? And they're like, well, even if you did, they wouldn't know who you were anymore. That's terrifying. Nope. No, thank you. And Phos is like, oh, this existential crisis sounds like a problem. But they're like, death allows us to find meaning in life. It gives us self-actualization and awareness. It makes us human. And they're like, you'll feel left behind if people pass, but that is also inevitable. And so Ventry says, I'm not lying when I say there are others like you down into the sea, but the truth is, I just want to see my homeland again. No matter what was lost, how much ruin befell it, no matter what, if no one is left, I still feel the urge to go back. Which is a very human feeling, right? There's a lot of human emotions there. So yeah, so Phos takes them back. And Phos is super kind. And they're like, I'll keep this little bowl with me. So because it's my job to take things back. And Ventry's like, wow, you really are naive. And you really are very simple. But okay, we'll go do that. My thing was, I would have been like, look, Phos is going to be able to make it to their homeland. They'll be fine. Just turn her loose and leave. But no, that's not what Phos does. I do love the transformation that Ventry does into this beautiful, like aquatic jellyfish octopus goddess. Like, she looks great. She's like, we're fleshy creatures. And it says, it smells as it did before the Lunarians arrived. So yeah, apparently the admirabilities all have genders though, because they have the cycle of life and death and they reproduce. And I like that she's like, you were calling yourself adorable, but you're really creepy. I like that Phos thinks that she's creepy, which is great. She's like, this is my true form. She's like, I guess. I love, she's like, you've got more legs, all the frills and all that. You just seem more, I like tasteless. And then she says, well, what are those? And she says, these are my most prized and precious parts. I mean, the lift on them. Girl, I don't blame you. I'd be celebrating those too, I suppose. And she says, the water jugs. Great. And she says, my kind are far sexier. And Phos is like, I don't know what that means. I have no idea. She's like, I don't know what sexy is. I'm just a gemstone. We don't really have sexual desires. And so then when she said there was no point in carrying the bowl, and Phos is like, well, we're supposed to treat all items with care. And the moment that Ventry looks back at Phos with that expression is like, you're not bringing that back. And I was like, oh no, it's a trap. Because then Phos says, I can only imagine what would happen if I didn't bring it back. And I was like, nope, not good at all. And so then I do like that, again, they do have a mind. They do have a brain. The gemstones do. So when Ventry says, you know, it's not a question I'm fully equipped to answer, Phos is like, but you do know the answer. You're just not saying it for a reason. And Ventry's like, oh, you're smarter than you look. And that's a problem. You know too much, right? Maybe the jellyfish were so taken with our beauty. And they're like, forget about the jellyfish. Maybe the snails were jealous of how cute we are. And they're like, oh, you were taught little discipline. And says, then you tell me. And so then Ventry explains the whole story about humanity splitting up into spirit, flesh, and bone. I also like how they eat basically the little plant there while they're talking. They're like, it's a figure of speech. They branched off into 3 species to be more accurate. And my people, the admirabilities, are said to have come from the flesh. And says, from them we inherited a cycle of reproduction and death, during which we build upon our knowledge. And then conversely, the bones are said to have made agreements with other life forms, gained longer lifespans, and returned to the land. So the way that Ventry explains it is that the gemstones made basically a deal with an organism to live forever. And that's the immortality bit of it, which maybe is why the spirits want the gemstones, because if that means they can be immortal, that's a very scary and dangerous thing, right? And then these are just stories that my people have passed down, so we don't know the full truth of it. But that's close. That's close to the way that we came about. So yeah, and the spirits have found incorrupt lands and are said to linger, seeking out the flesh and bones to bring about a revival. So yeah, so the spirit is in this incorrupt land, which is the moon. And we got to bring everybody together to revive humanity. But I do like what Ventry says here, saying like, no, but what does she say there? Says they want to seek out a revival just like they do, the Lunarians. When she's like on the edge of the water's surface with the light shining down on her, she looks so good. Like that's probably gonna be the thumbnail. And Phos is like, well, the spirits, the Lunarians, are they doing this to become human again? And when Ventry says, well, I can't say to that, but what I do know, we each have our own motivations. Like you want to stay on your part for your reason. The spirits want to do their own thing. Lunarians, we want to do our thing. We don't necessarily want to come together. It's ludicrous to imagine we could ever return to what we once were. Yeah, I would say the whole evolution thing over however many years. I don't think they're going to go back to being the way that they were, right? No, don't think that that's possible. Their ways are eerie and incomprehensible. Very human, right? And then Ventry talks about how, but like you said yourself, we can only move forward. Interesting. We have to fight for ourselves and those close to us. Which in turn, Ventry ends up saying, since we can't, we can only rely on what's close to us and move forward. Ventry, aka Aaron Yeager here, is like, I'm going to fight for my brother and try to do my best to save him. And if I have to screw all the rest of y'all out of the picture, then that's fine. I'm like, all right. That's like basically Ventry giving us their entire philosophy here. And Phos is like, well, why does it have to be that way? If what you say is true, then the spirit was part of us before, right? So, and they're like, who knows? Though they have no enemies of their own, the Lunarians lust for battle and are never satisfied. I think that's interesting that even though they have no enemies, even though they have no natural enemies, they lust for battle and are never satisfied. Which, what could be more human than being at the top of the food chain and fighting for no reason? What could be more human, right? What could be more human? And I think that makes a lot of sense because the spirit part of it, they don't have the body. They don't have the body and the bones to have the brain, and they don't have the flesh and the soul for the reasoning. So they're just aimlessly, just a spirit and this embodiment. So it's like, I do kind of like the idea that they're suggesting that without the mind and bones, without the flesh and bones, they're just reduced. Because usually you think of like barbarianism as being a lack of enlightenment with the soul. But this series is kind of suggesting that the spirit is naturally lustful for battle and never satisfied, which is very interesting. But I guess that all can tie back to the whole Garden of Eden. And once you eat the apple of forbidden knowledge, then that's tied to it, perhaps. It may speak volumes to what these humans once were. Then both of us. And I like the Phos is like, well, then your species and mine have changed for the better, right? Our people should work together, right? And Ventry's like, yeah, we should. the moment that she said we should, I was like, ooh, because we should doesn't mean that we will or that we're going to. I was like, yeah, that whole we should thing, about that. I'm sure if her brother hadn't been captured, that wouldn't have been a problem. So then Diamond shows up looking for Phos, and Phos has basically pulled a Ferris Bueller. putting the body under there, under the little blanket there to fool Diamond. I'm hopeful that since we don't get the timeline of when this is happening in relation to Phos being underwater, I'm hoping this happened a lot earlier and maybe they're on their way to find Phos. That'd be great, right? That'd be real great. And so then, because Phos is like, it took us all day, so maybe that means that they're on their way. And then Phos is like, there's nothing here. And I'm like, that's a bad sign. That's a sign that you're being trapped. Not good. And then Phos is like, I'll just take a nap. And I was like, I wouldn't. I wouldn't take a nap in the middle of nowhere where you've not been like, no, Phos, you're too innocent. Why are you so innocent? No. But anyway, then Venture's like, wow, forgive me. And that's when, okay, so let me see if I can see this correctly. Phos is attacked. It looks like they missed her mainly, but got Phos's legs. So Phos's legs have been shattered, which is not good, which is really bad. And then, oh, that shot's going to be the thumbnail. The shot of Venture looking down like, oh, you poor pathetic fool. I'm like, girl, that Venture, Phos, this snail tried to eat you before. You really trust in this thing? But apparently we are. And then poor Phos, they're like, and that's when Venture says, sorry about this, but what do they say there? I offer you my companion here in exchange for my brother, Aculadius. And Aculadius is in this giant ass conch shell. The magic conch is right there. Holy shit. They have a giant conch that is chained down. Also, I like the fact that the Lunarians, like, they arrive on a black cloud that looks like it's half a brain. You make what you want out of that. But yeah, they've basically offered the conch to get Phos. I'm like, oh my God. The one thing is, that conch is enormous. So you would think you could see that from a mile away. So maybe, who knows? Who knows what we're going to do? This is okay. So we got a lot into that. We basically have 3 species in this world. They were all once humanity that is broken down into these 3 biological planes of existence. And the spirits are maybe wanting to bring the whole group together to reforge humanity. How they're planning to accomplish that, how they are planning to do it, to what end, we don't know. We haven't been to the moon, so we don't know how that's going to be. There's a part of me that wants to go to the moon and see what the hell is going on over there to know what's happening. But then there's another part of me that's like, nah, we don't have to go there. I have a feeling at some point, because Cinnabar wants to go to the moon, I have a feeling they're going to go to the moon. But I don't know if I want that to happen because that feels like an end of the series sort of thing. I don't know. But yeah. So in any case, I'm super curious to know your thoughts down below about this. And this episode, oh my gosh. I'm very curious to know what you all think of this. And please no spoilers. I do have mods that are going to check this show. So if you just get a heart from me, you won't, that means I didn't read your comment, but hopefully I'll get some fun comments that, are not spoilery, but constructive. So we'll just see where that goes. But anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care. And yeah, I'll be back next week with episode 5. Oh my God, of Land of the Lustrous. I'll see you then. Bye.